All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Greg Prickrell. I'm one of the founders of Career.pm. And this is the first episode in a series we're calling Breaking In, about how people got into product management. And it's just an opportunity for folks to share their experiences, hoping that that will be informational or inspirational to other folks trying to get into PM. And today I am joined by Rob Fontenot. And Rob, do you want to say a few words about yourself and what you're doing today?
Sure. So thanks, Greg, for having me. I'm excited to do this, excited to share my experiences. So like you said, my name is Rob Fontenot. Sometimes you'll see me as John on certain platforms. It's a first name, middle name thing that confuses everyone, so I apologize. But I'm originally from South Louisiana, where there's literally no tech at all. And moved up to Utah. I was a cheerleader in college, and we played a local university in Utah. I met my wife at the game. So after I graduated from university, I moved up to Utah, and that's where I first found tech. Honestly, I was a contractor for Intel for 5 years in their software group, and worked with a lot of PMs across a lot of different organizations across the world. Worked with, like I said, a lot of PM leaders and product managers, and that's where I fell in love with the practice. And so, without giving too much away before we get into the questions, that's a little bit about my background. And today I'm working as a product manager in Utah for a B2B SaaS company.
Very cool. So tell me about what you were doing, your specific responsibilities right before you got into product management.
Yeah, so right before I was actually leading a team of contractors for Intel's developer relations division. And our job was to partner with software vendors across the world to help with optimization or integration of new technology that Intel was bringing out. And then we'd work with Intel's marketing teams to take our ISV partners into independent software vendors to market with the collaborative product that we worked on.
Okay, and how did that lead to a product management position?
It didn't. I thought it would, because I felt like it translated more than what it showed on paper.
Hmm.
And what on paper people saw sales, and I'm not sure if my resume skills are just horrible, but people thought sales, and so that feedback that I kept getting was what ultimately led me down the path that I went down to try to break in.
Okay. And tell me about how, that first position, how you became aware of it, what interested you in going into product management, why you were interested in that first opportunity.
Yeah, so like I said, I worked with a bunch of product managers and product leaders, and I loved what they did. I loved how involved they were in the process. They were often working with, like, the PM leaders were working with the CEO, the product managers were working with marketing, with development, and I like being in the middle of things and knowing things. And
Hmm.
so that was the first bit of interest. But then just the level of engagement and the type of work that they did really intrigued me, and so I started doing courses on, like, Coursera and Udemy, and just trying to learn about the practice more. And we were doing things like storyboarding with product teams and other companies. We were doing design thinking workshops with them. So there were frameworks and practices that I was familiar with that PMs can use. And that's really what got me into it. And so my career path at that point, as in that contract role, was to either try to work my way up through this organization who contracted us out to Intel, or try to get into product management. And so I tried to pivot to product management for about a year, a little over a year. Sent out resumes, sent out applications, talked to people, and I felt stuck, honestly. Which it
Hmm.
sounds like from people we talk to, a lot of people feel stuck in their journey too. So.
Hmm. And do you remember the interview that got you the job, or the, series of interviews?
Yeah, so my journey was a little more winding, because of the feedback that I kept getting that my background appeared to be more sales driven. I had this thought of, well, it feels impossible to pivot roles and industries. So I'm going to at least try to get in the right industry. And so if people think my background is in sales, let me try to get a sales role in a SaaS company, a software company, and try to work my way in that way, because at least I'm closer. right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I started putting out applications for sales jobs, and traditional sales I'm not fond of, but I wanted to make it work so I can get closer to my goal. And within 2 weeks of landing that new job, well, I'll back up. I was actually very forward with the recruiter up front. And I told her, I said, look, I'm applying for a sales role. Ultimately, I'd love to see myself in product in your organization, but I
Mhm.
want to kick butt in sales and then work my way to get there. And I did the
Cool.
same thing with the
So,
hiring.
yeah,
Oh, go
kind of
ahead.
setting that expectation or making that clear early worked for you.
It did. And to me, it felt like if an organization felt like that was a showstopper for them and they were going to limit where I could and see myself or envision myself in the organization, and that was a red flag for me for the organization. And so I felt like being crystal clear and transparent would set myself up best for the organization that said, yeah, we'll hire you.
Yeah. Very cool. And was there something remarkable in one of those interviews? Was there a moment where you felt like, wow, I really have this? Or was there a moment that you were really concerned that something had happened that you were like, wow, this may not work out?
um I mean, yeah, there was a couple times, right? Like, there's always risk whenever you have something steady and full time that you're doing well in, because I was doing really well where I was, and I loved it. I really did. And so there's always risk when you move to a new thing, right?
Hmm.
Recruiters and hiring managers tend to paint a picture of their organization and the job with rose-colored glasses, and so that there was more like an internal struggle of whether or not like I wanted to take the job,
Hmm.
and but in terms of like would I get the job, I felt pretty comfortable based on the feedback I was getting from the
Hmm.
recruiter and the hiring manager through the process that if I wasn't at the top, like I was one of the top candidates. So that was with all the frustration of the year of trying to find a job that felt good to at least be in that position.
Sure. And once you became, so yeah, once you started, working as a product manager, can you remember your first few days or your first few weeks, what that was like? Was it intimidating? Did you feel right at home? Were you kind of, was it a baptism by fire? What happened?
Yeah, so it wasn't horrible, and I think the transition was made better because when I was in the sales role, within 2 weeks to that, I met one of our senior product managers. His name's Bill, and so I went up to him and I'm like, hey, look, I'm really interested in product. I'd love to pick your brain, go out for coffee, and he was like, oh, cool, and he loves helping people. He was mentoring people already at the time, so it just worked out well. And we kept in touch. And he's like, look, if you have any, you're in sales, so if you have any customer feedback, any like from a product mindset, like I'd love to hear that. And so through this time, like I'm sharing feedback and actually sharing some side projects that I'm working on that are product related. And so when the time came, they didn't want to hire a product manager. They actually needed help with UX research.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of my foot in the door into the product team, even though I wasn't a product manager. So again, a very winding route. Um, but the reason why Bill was actually able to sell me to the director was the fact that I was in sales and I was used to talking to customers and used to asking them lots of questions. And so a user research role made a lot of sense in the way that he sold me. And
Hmm.
I was doing other things to try to develop myself to be ready to be in product. But I think that's what made the transition smooth was that relationship with one of our senior PMs and then the background that I had.
Very cool. So let me kind of rewind and tell me if I have this right. It seems like, being very transparent about what you want is important. Being
Absolutely.
strategic, if you can't get a PM job immediately, working your way toward it, and that in combination with this kind of clarity of intent might get you there. And then once you have a job, really networking with people who are doing PM is very important. Those are kind of three takeaways that I get from what you said.
Absolutely. And most people I've talked to that have made that transition, that have kind of struggled like I did, were able to do so successfully once they were inside of an organization. And I've talked to a lot of recruiters who've said, look, unless you have a killer cover letter where you can sell me on why you want to make a industry change and a role change, and you can prove to me that you can do that, it's darn near impossible to do that. So if you're,
Yeah.
I would say pick one or the other and start there.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of coaching and I find it fascinating that the most common approach to finding a job is going to job sites, sending a resume, maybe a cover letter. And in my experience, that is the lowest percentage approach that exists. And the highest percentage approach, this is, we have what we call a learning path on this on career.pm, is getting a job where you're employed. You have an opportunity to establish yourself, to build a network. So the last thing you want to be is in this huge pile of resumes, even if it's electronic that they get when there's a job posting. You want to be on the inside and walk your resume in, or go talk to the hiring manager, or find a liaison in that organization. So very cool. Very cool to hear about that. I think there's a lot to learn. As you started doing product management, what was kind of the biggest challenge you had to overcome in terms of the way you were used to doing things? Or, sometimes the jobs we have previously prepare us well to do product management, but they also bring with them some baggage. I found that I had to overcome some of the things that I'd done in other jobs to be an effective product manager. Can you think of anything? Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, there was a couple of key challenges. One was going to Swipe Clock, the company that I'm at. I was really successful in my previous role, my contracting role, and having to start over. I dealt with this kind of like imposter syndrome, where like,
Mm-hmm.
was I only good in this role, or do I actually have skills and competencies that transfer over well? And my onboarding into sales went really well, but then like a couple months later, things started to tank off. And so I'm like, oh man, I must not be very good at this. And people in the organization knew like how the sales teams performed. And so it almost felt like the director was taking a risk by bringing me on,
Mm-hmm.
because those months leading up to it weren't weren't great sales months for me.
Yeah.
And and so those were a couple challenges, right? Was dealing with going from a successful position to being less successful. And then I think feedback, right? Like I feel like all great artists know that they need feedback and they thrive on feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and great product managers know the same thing. Um, and I felt like the team that I stepped into knew that, but I wasn't quite prepared for it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was getting kind of attacked, but that's just the nature of the beast, where the mock-ups and wireframes that I was building, they're trying to help me come to the right solution and to the best solution. They're not necessarily picking on me, saying that I'm
Sure.
not doing well.
Yeah.
So
Sure. So I think, yeah, that's an interesting observation that when we go into a new job, much less an entirely new kind of discipline, the tendency is to feel insecure. I don't know if everybody has heard of that imposter syndrome, but it's this feeling like you're just faking it and you're really, behind the scenes not capable of doing the job. That can be very stressful. And that sometimes that insecurity can make us take feedback the wrong way. And we have to kind of step back, and hopefully we're in a supportive environment and realize that, hey, people are trying to help me get better. And I would add to that, if you're in a situation where you're not getting feedback, it's in your best interest to ask, to try to get it, to constantly be telling people, hey, how was this? Is there something that I could have done better? Is there, more value that I could have added? So yeah, I think that is a great observation. Um, if you were to go back, think about when you started, finally got kind of the PM position.
mhm.
Given what you know today, what is the advice you would give to yourself, back then, that would have helped maybe deal with this stress, or helped you to be more effective as you got started?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I mean, you can read all the books and all the articles, and you can listen to podcasts, and there's a lot of great information and insights you can take from that. But I think why internships are so powerful is because like you actually get to be in the day to day with people that are doing the job. And I always try to encourage people to talk to people who are in the day to day, but actually seeing it and being around it is different than
Mm-hmm.
hearing about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if you can't get a formal internship, if some organization is you know transparent enough to let you go and like shadow for a day just to see what it's like, I think that would be super beneficial, because um, then it's not the he said she said stuff. You actually get to see what a day in the life of a product manager is, and I think that would prepare you mentally a lot more for what's to come.
Gotcha. Very good. I am wondering, I'm somebody who tries to celebrate my mistakes, and I have a lot to celebrate if I think back on my career. And I'm wondering, as you got into the role, if something sticks out, what was like just kind of a rookie mistake that you made that maybe, taught you a lot through pain? Is there something that stands out, maybe a mistake you made as you got started?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that jump out, right? I would say trying to lead through influence in a cross-functional manner is something that can be really tricky. One, when you're new to an organization, and then two, when you're not the subject matter expert on the
Hmm.
topic they're talking about. Uh, um, so going back to the imposter syndrome, I think one of the mistakes that I made was feeling like I had to know things, uh, like things
Hmm.
that I weren't necessarily in my lane on the product team, but because I was on the product team and I was being asked about these things, I felt like I needed to have to answer those things.
Hmm.
And my boss had to kind of stop me. He was like, he didn't do it publicly, but later on, he's like, look, man, he's like, you know, don't feel like you have to answer to these things. And really I wasn't giving the best answer for the organization to
Hmm.
run with, and I should have been comfortable deferring at that time, saying, hey, look, this isn't my lane, you're better off asking this person, they're not in this meeting today, but how about you guys connect offline? And so even though I was trying to run this meeting and help coordinate this cross departmental effort, it wasn't my lane and I should have known that. And so that would be my
Yeah.
advice, is like, know your lane.
Yeah. Know your lane and realize that we're all learning all the time. So one of the things that most impresses me in professionals is sometimes I'll hear somebody just say, I don't know. Nothing else. They don't try to cover for it. They don't try to say, I'll try to figure it out. They just say, I don't know about that. That's
Yep.
not what I do. It can be super powerful. So Rob, thanks so much for sharing. I think there's a ton to take away from what you said, to people who are aspiring to be PMs, to people who are just starting that journey. I would like to turn it over to give the folks attending an opportunity to chime in if they would like to ask a question. You can do that in chat. Anybody have a question for Rob? Let me get down here. There's one new message that's not showing up. Okay, not so much. Yeah, really appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. As I said, super informative. I think there's a lot of insight in what you shared. And what you shared is very similar to what I hear from a lot of the people that I'm coaching, that I've mentored over the years. So, thanks again. And, maybe we can have you back sometime.
Yeah, anytime. It was a pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
thanks.